When one of the world's biggest global car makers brings out a new pure electric mass market car, we here at Electrifying are bound to pay attention. But this new Ford Mustang Mach-E doesn't so much ask for attention as demand it. And Ford is pinning a lot on this car, not least of all some of its most iconic badges. But before I get to all of that, please do like, subscribe and comment on the video and tell us whether you think this is worthy of wearing that Mustang badge. And to help you make that decision, well, I better get on with it. I'll start with a bit of a history lesson and some things to think about because, as we all know, everyone adores a good Ford.
First up, the whole idea that Ford has slapped a load of familiar and iconic branding on a car that, well, a car that has precisely nothing to do with those badges. It's marketing, obviously. The original Ford Mustang Mach-1 was a muscle car from the late 60s old school that could be had with a ginormous 7-litre V8 engine. The Mach-E, well, that's a different kettle of horsepower, because it's electric.
And Mustang? Well, actually, the only thing this car has to do with the original Mustang is that. The horsey badge. And that's a risky strategy from Ford. I mean, you're trying to draw people in using familiar iconic names, but you risk disappointing and offending at the same time.
But let's ignore that particular argument for a bit. Please do give us your opinions in the comments and concentrate on the actual car. The basics are that it's a 5-seat SUV with extra swoops. It's got a bit of a trout pout with this grille, a curvy roofline, and yes, modern Mustang rear lights. It definitely looks like a Ford, but generally I really quite like it.
There's a 402-litre boot, which isn't massive because it's slightly compromised by the swoop of the hatchback, although there is a neat little double floor for hiding your charge cables. There's plenty of room in the back, even though I did have to duck slightly to get in here, but I'm 6 foot and I've got plenty of space. There's no hump in the floor, so my extremely long legs have plenty of space to stretch out. And in the front is this 81-litre frunk. Now this one's got a funny little divider in it to help you organise your shopping, but this is basically a giant bucket with drain holes in the bottom, which would be perfect for filling with ice and champagne for one of those celebratory occasions, or you just keep all your muddy kit in it. By the way, this is one of the advantages of using a bespoke electric platform because you can make the most of the space available. Once you're up in the hot seat, well, it gets very modern. You cannot miss this 15.5-inch portrait touchscreen because it takes up most of the dash. But actually, there's a nice little 10-inch readout right in front of you for all your relevant information. And as for the rest of the stuff, well, that is controlled either through the touchscreen or via voice control, but more of that in a minute. I know this is small stuff, but I really quite like the way that the Mach-E's interior hangs together. I mean, there's loads of storage. There's this big sort of bin down here. There's a wireless charging pad here for your phone. There's cup holders. There's even this thing in between the front seats for storing, well, whatever you need to store. I have sort of spotted a couple of shared Ford buttons and stalks, but generally the Mach-E's interior feels quite exciting, and that's good. Nitty-gritty time, the driving. Now this gets slightly complicated, so pay attention.
As I mentioned, the Mach-E is built on an all-new platform, and it's available with either a 76 or a 99 kilowatt-hour battery, and with either a single motor giving rear-wheel drive or twin motor for all-wheel drive. There are also different charging speeds depending on your battery. Regular editions can cope with up to 115 kilowatts, and the larger battery models can be charged at up to 150. But for the time being, you can have standard or extended range battery in either rear-wheel drive or all-wheel drive with slightly different onboard charging. Got that? Good. The cheapest is standard range rear-wheel drive, which gives 273 miles of range and 265 brake horsepower. Then there are the all-wheel drive versions of that, the same horsepower, but the extra weight means it only manages 248 miles on the test cycle. There's a faster one, the one I've got here, which has the bigger battery and four-wheel drive, and this one has 346 brake horsepower and 335 miles of range. But I think the one that most people might be interested in is the 290 brake horsepower extended range rear-wheel drive, because that manages a possible 379 miles on a single charge. That's not bad, eh?
They are all, it has to be said, going to be more than fast enough for daily use. This is currently the fastest model, and it gets from 0 to 62 miles an hour in just over 5 seconds, and the slowest is only just over 6. There is also going to be a GT model coming next year. That's got 480 brake horsepower and should hit 62 in around 3.5 seconds, which, you know, that sounds a bit like overkill, especially when you consider that it costs £75,000. Mind you, I am a big fan of overkill. In the meantime, this one, the extended range all-wheel drive, the Mach-E E4X, is the top of the range, and it is bluntly grand. It is really quite quick. I've put my foot down. Oh, hello. I mean, you can feel the four-wheel drive working around this corner, and it's really very easy to place on the road. Now, part of that is down to the steering, which is very nicely weighted. It's not particularly feelsome. You don't really know what's going on with the front wheels, but it's very accurate and quite nice. And the fact that everything is kind of smooth and progressive. From the one-pedal regen, look, if I take my foot off, to when you actually put your foot on the hydraulic brake, it all melds together very nicely. Also, the way the car flows around the corner. It corners flat, there's not much body roll, it feels quite comfortable.
Yes, the ride is firm at low speed, but the payoff is that when you go faster, the Mach-E feels deliciously sort of semi-sporty.
Now, I wasn't expecting that because this car looks quite big and beefy and heavy. That rear three-quarter, because of the swoopy roofline and the kind of hatchback, there's a massive blind spot, but it feels kind of more nimble than it looks, if that makes sense. It looks kind of blobby, but this car is actually a little bit of a laugh. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that this is actually one of the more fun EVs to drive. It's not quite as good as a Jaguar I-Pace or a Tesla, but it beats things like an Audi e-tron or a Mercedes EQC into the weeds. It is really quite fun. Although I have to say, these seats could do with a bit more side bolster, because every time I go round a corner, it feels like I'm going to fall out of them. Oh look, deer running down the road in front of me. That's exciting. It's just gone in there. Look, I could be David Attenborough at this point.
And here's an interesting thing. Like all electric cars, the Mach-E has 3 driving modes. They're called Whisper, Active and Untamed. Or Whisper, Engage and Unbridled if you live in the US. Now, these modes don't alter the car's basic settings or change power, they just play with the throttle and steering response, as well as turning up or down the sound synthesizer and, believe it or not, the interior ambient lighting.
So if you're in active, which is that one, it's got normal throttle response, a kind of blue light for the interior, blue up front, and the steering is as it should be. I mean, that's quite a nice setting as well. Listen. It's got like a very faint rumbly hum, not very intrusive, but you can definitely hear some sound generation going on. If you put it in Whisper, it goes kind of a green colour, greeny blue, I think that is. And then everything calms down, so the throttle gets less sensitive, the steering is a little bit more relaxed and a little bit lighter, and there is no sound generation. So if I put my foot down, it's basically just the whine of the motor. I actually prefer this mode because it's the most relaxed, and at this point the car actually feels quite chilled. If you want to go a bit faster and you want a bit more response, a little bit more bite, you press Untamed there. Everything goes red, you get these little orangey stripes, all the lighting's gone red, and yeah, loads more throttle response, loads more steering response, and if you listen, you can hear the weirdest kind of... You hear that? It sounds like a computer-generated V8 or somebody... I don't know what it sounds like. Is it a V6 engine with tubular exhausts, as heard from a different room? You can make your own mind up, but it does sound a bit weird. By the way, if you don't like the noise, you can just switch it off. There's a switch here called propulsion sound, and it's gone.
But generally, the Mach-E is absolutely spot on. Some small gripes aside, there's plenty to like for the money. Yes, the money. Well, the regular Mach-E has a pretty solid standard spec, with adaptive cruise control, auto headlights, front and rear parking sensors, a rear view camera, dual zone air conditioning, active park assistance and heated front seats, all for £40,350. One step up is the rear drive 281 brake horsepower extended range at 49,980, and that's the one with the longest between charges, with the four-wheel drive cars weighing in 46,650 for the version with the smaller battery and 254 brake horsepower, and the flagship like ours here with 336 brake horsepower at 57,030. And those prices, stiff as they sound, are competitive in this market. Oh yeah, the 480 brake horsepower GT will be along later, and that should be £75,000. Crikey.
You can tell that Ford is a big company that has spent a lot of money getting the Mach-E right, because if you're going to take on Tesla, you've got to be at the top of your game. And this car is pitching just about right, I think.
And so back to the whole idea of calling this very new, very interesting car by an old name. The Mustang Mach-E is a car trying to make an explicit link between Ford's iconic brands and a new electric future, but it's a gamble. Ford says it will have 17 electrified vehicles by 2022, but actually they're mostly generic mild hybrids and a few PHEVs. The next full BEV doesn't arrive until 2022, and guess what it is? A Transit.
But you know what? This is a really rather good EV SUV, and it's going to have to be, because it's going up against the likes of Tesla's Model 3 and the Model Y, which is coming next year, as well as the Polestar 2, the Mercedes EQC, the Audi e-tron, and even the Jaguar I-Pace. Yes, there is no lack of competition these days. I'd still like to try some of the lower price versions to see if they stand up to the hype, but so far, the Ford Mustang Mach-E, well, it's not much of a traditional Mustang, but it's a very, very good Ford.
As ever, do check out our library of videos on all the cars we've mentioned that might catch your eye if you're in the market for an electric SUV, plus a load of other stuff that you'll find useful, though very little nudity.